Let's kick off the second parallel session in this room. This session which we have chosen to call Data Demystified. Because in this session we're going to share some storytelling examples of different ways of working with data, and as if by chance we have different sectors represented here in our expert panel. Since starting the Stella Polaris project, the role that data holds, especially in AI development, has really increased, and our understanding of the role that data holds has increased. Within the project, we meet AI developers, researchers, and students, where in those meetings, one of the first and most common questions that we get is, well, what data exists within this question? What can we do? What do we have to work with, really? And while most people would associate evidence material from investigations, we want to kind of expand on our view of what relevant data can be. Because we know that there is a lot more data available that we are not using to the extent we could. And there is a lot more we can do to make data more available in the society. And as we've heard throughout the day, collaboration is one of the key themes for today. And I think this plays into the role of data as well. With the development of AI, I think the focus on data has grown as well. And especially with the development and the commercialization of large language models, we have made it more easy to really use data, to manage data. And we're kind of seeing the dawn of the data developer as a role as well. So this session is really exploring one of the core necessities behind AI. And I would like to start off with this panel with a question, but of course, first you need to get to know them. With us we have Rickard Sandberg, who is Associate Professor and the head of the Center for Data Analytics at the Stockholm School of Economics. And Martin Oud from the organization Men for Equality. You are head of psychosocial support. We also have Brewster, who is Assistant Professor of Information and also Technology and Exploitation Lead at the Nottingham University Rights Lab, as well as a familiar face, Mathijs Homminga, who is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of WebIQ. So welcome to this session. As I said, I want to start off with a common question to all of you. What is one word that you associate when I say data?
Or for me, it's information.
Yeah?
So data correctly extracted means information.
Excellent.
Yeah, that was a really good answer, I think.
We can steer into the more abstract.
No, but it's definitely, we collect a lot of data that doesn't become information at all. So I'm guilty of that. But absolutely, information would be the first thing that I want to have from data, at least.
Mm-hmm. Ben?
Gold dust, maybe? I think as academics, we spend a lot of time sat around going, where's the data? Who's got the data? How can we get the data? What can we do with the data? So I think for us, it's very much getting good, strong data to help explain a problem that we're looking at, I think is gold dust. Yeah.
Gold dust, that's a good one, I think. Mathijs?
I would say bias is interesting. Because I think a lot of people just take the data and start to derive information from it. But it's really good to understand what kind of data you have in your hands, where it comes from, and also, of course, what kind of bias is in that information, in that data.
Really, really interesting. And as you hear, we have a different set of associations, and I'm quite surprised that no one of you mentioned headache, because that's one word that I would for sure associate. But in order for us to have more of a common understanding of what we talk about when we're saying the word data, we have asked Rickard Sandberg to give us a short introduction to the world of data. So take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And first of all, oops. I am honored.
Oh.
And, sorry.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's
Yep.
fine.
Excellent.
So I am very honored and pleased to be here at this panel and to be part of these discussions. And I would also like to mention that I think that Stella Polaris is a fantastic Swedish initiative on this work fighting abuse on children then. So I'd also like to encourage you to read the report, which I think will be published very soon, where you get great information with respect on Stella Polaris' work then. So having said that, I will talk then very generally about data. So first of all, then, I would like to draw the attention to that data is the perceived as the most valuable asset that we actually have today. So even more valuable than oil, then say. Now, of course, it depends on how you measure this, but at least it gives an indication of like how important data actually is today. So to some people, data sounds like extremely like boring, and as Erika here, it was like maybe like headache or something like this. But and that might then be true. But I think there is a lot of power in the data. And as Mathijs also then was saying, that is, of course, I mean, incorrectly used. I mean, if it's a bias in data, for instance, then it comes with like great risks. So you must also like master the data. You must like qualify the data before you use it. So what is then data? So typically we like to define data or put it into two different categories. And that is structured and unstructured data. So structured data, that is data like in Excel spreadsheets, in databases, number, figures. And unstructured data, that would be like text, audio, video, and then so forth. But all of these are then qualified as data, and then grouped together, we can then extract different type of information. And then, perhaps needless to say, but with respect to these different type of data that we have, structured and unstructured, say, there are also different tools, AI tools that are applicable for then correctly extracting then the information that we have. And then, of course, and an obvious question is, where is all of this data coming from? Yeah, there is a bunch of resources that we have, and I will show you a graph on the next slide then, giving a little bit more numbers down to the actual amount of data that we do have. But then, of course, you have Internet of Things, IoT, and then sensor data. And that is then coming from the industry. And then, as you see here, it's roughly like 70% of the data is then coming from the industry. So that would then be like one example. And then also that we have been discussing today, so we also obviously also have some information then, or data coming from the darknet. But there are a bunch of different sources and different, obviously, then type of data coming down from these different sources. But then, how has the evolution of data looked like then? So with this graph here, you see the blue solid bars. That's the total amount of data that we have, and it started around like 2010. And then the shape of the graph that you do have, that is like an exponential increase of data. And it started around 2010, and then you also even have a prediction for 2025. So there are a few takeaways down here that you can notice. And then this a little bit lighter blue bars, that is the amount of structured data. So one takeaway of this graph that is that the vast majority of the data that we do have today is unstructured data. So that's one takeaway. Another takeaway that is that you see the data from 2020, roughly like 60 zettabytes of data. So I'll come back to the definition of zettabytes. And since 2020, it's doubled then to the amount of data that we're expecting them to see like today. So this is also then a reference to like the Cambrian explosion of data. So put differently, it's like an exponential increase of data that we see. And maybe then like an open question to the audience, so why is this graph starting 2010 and say not like 2000? Any like blunt answer to this?
Anyone?
Yeah.
It's so small compared to today's rates that it's basically zero.
That was absolutely, so that could be one explanation, right? Yeah, so I think the main explanation that is that the introduction of smartphones, and then again Internet of Things, and you have tablets, and you have Facebook, you have Instagram, and then so forth. So that was like the start of this one. So around 2010 we started also more frequently to talk about big data. So that was like the breakthrough of that terminology then. So just a few simple data use cases. So these are not like specific for the theme that we have today. But then, of course, with respect to image recognition, you can think about that you have knuckles on photos or images. So that could then be used to for the theme of today then to identify then these offenders, say. And then you also have this NLP that was already mentioned, but that is like a super powerful tool with respect to extracting information from text data then, say. And then you also have predictive analytics, and that's like a very general term, but maybe you would like to calculate the likelihood that someone is an offender. So that would then be like the tool, and it also fits like very well with respect to preventive analytics, or you would like to do or take preventive actions. And I would also then like to mention that, of course, now that we have a lot of data, but then also like in a sense the beauty with like machine learning and say that is that you train a model, but then the day after you have new data and then you can train a model again. And the purpose of that is that it should become like refined. And we talk about classification, false positive, false negatives. So these are the two types of mistakes with respect to classification that we like to minimize. So the more and the better the data, the more and the better we can train the models. So we can be sharper to identify the actual cases, so to say. Then data quality. Always when I talk about data and AI, I really emphasize this. So data quality is like everything, and this is what Mathijs there was indicating. And the reason for this is very simple, because data is the input for most of the AI that we're doing today. So if you cannot secure the quality of the data, you can never secure the output. So that is the garbage in, garbage out principle. But you can never like underestimate the importance of the quality of data. So this is we work really hard on to secure the quality of the data before you start any type of analysis. Lack of data perhaps speaks for itself, but many times then we would actually need like more data. And I think for the theme for today, we actually lack a lot of data. So there is much work to be done then there to gather like new type of data. And we talked about like collaboration, so maybe it's like data sharing that could be possible then with respect to that. And then redundant data, yeah, sorry to say, but most of the data actually is not very valuable. So that really depends then. But most of the data is, we call it like dark data. Yeah, it's like garbage. GDPR, General Data Protection Rules, like super important. So very short, you have heard about this already for a long time. But that's just the principles of how you collect, store, and then share data. So here then, like 2023, you have Meta or Facebook. So they were fined just because of they didn't actually pay attention to GDPR, because they exchanged a lot of European data to US. So it was a super high fine then to 2023 with respect to neglecting GDPR. Yeah, and then addressing then biases in data, that could be like a course or a seminar on its own. So what is bias in the data? It's non-representative data, or like faulty data, or like skew data that you're using. And the takeaway there is that if you use like biased data, then it means that you train your models on like faulty data. And here you have numerous of examples where the training data has been wrong with like severe consequences. So there are famous or infamous recruiting processes where like the top candidates turned out to be young white males below 25 years old. And the reason for that answer there was the wrong training data. Yeah. I think I stopped there, Erika.
Yeah, thank you. Would you like to take a seat again? Excellent. So thank you for that. I'm hearing that we do have a lot of data in society, but not necessarily usable data, and that is one of the core challenges that we are facing today. One thing that you mentioned in regards to bias in data is, of course, I mean, the risk of this impacting our decision making as well. This is kind of the situation where we would train an AI or use any kind of biased data to inform a decision, and then apply that tool or that decision to an entire demographic as if it was representative. But what we're actually risking by using biased data, which might not include all or representative data, is actually excluding an entire group of people, which is something that we should never do, of course.
I can just super quickly add to that one then. So I mean, it's like super risky, and with today's advancements and ease of using technology, if you call AI like a technology then. So then it means that you miss the foundations. So then again, going back to the input, the data. So I mean, anyone can use AI today, but you don't know or you cannot ensure that the outcomes that are reliable, for instance. So it's going to be super important still that we understand the foundations before we take action, so to say.
And what are some other terms when it comes to the general usage of AI and the knowledge of AI in society, or data, sorry, in society? What trends do you see there?
Yeah, so down there, but this is general trends, broadly speaking about any type of organizations. So then we already touched upon this. So data quality will always be very high up on the agenda to ensure data quality, and we can do this in various ways. So we have developed quite advanced techniques then actually, and also algorithms to verify that the data is having a high quality. And then also with respect to organizations, so then it's also still to a large extent, of course, depending on the type of organization, but there is a lack of trust in data. So that means that you have to build success stories with respect to data, then in order to build trust in this one. So simple use cases where you actually can demonstrate the pure or the true value of data. So that is something that organizations are facing then. And then shortly and finally, maybe sound very boring, but it's simple data management, data strategy, and then also how to collect the data, how to report the data. And for a little bit bigger organizations, they are really thinking hard if they not already have incorporated. It's a fancy word, but it's a data fabric, a data mesh. That's an overall a global or organizational system, how to structure and work with data.
Super interesting insights, and these kind of use cases for data is precisely what we're doing here today, I think, showing how we can actually work with different kinds of data. You mentioned a report which is coming soon, hopefully. And within Stella Polaris, we have actually tried to highlight the importance of data and most of all, the relevant data which is actually accessible and available in society, which could be used to combat child sexual abuse through innovation, through research, through a greater awareness of the data, and really a greater data collection. And this report is exploring data from 5 different sectors of society. We want to inspire actors to see relevant data which might be used, that is available, that is not only, for example, a child sexual abuse material or seized evidence, for example, a grooming chat. Because while those data are very important, and as you mentioned, we have both image data and text data available from those sources, they are both pertaining to abuse that has already taken place. In order to look at child sexual abuse prevention, we also need to look at data from a broader perspective, from the entire society, looking at, for example, say, youth sport data, for example, or social media behavioral data, for example. And sometimes this data is very obviously related to the question. Sometimes it's very obvious that you are a part of an organization which is collecting, using, or in some way making value of a data which is usable and applicable to other things than what you are actually working with as a primary topic. And sometimes we need to have a look at that data, ask ourselves, what can we do with it, and what can we learn from other people who are also using similar data? This is something that you have experienced with, Martin, working with the organization MEN in the project Fronta, where you actually pooled data from different support chats, anonymous support chats, available for children and youths in Sweden. And you made a prototype tool with funding from Stella Polaris. So yeah, tell us a bit more about that.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for having me. And first of all, I feel a little bit out of place. This is not my typical context, especially not the topic at hand, the data, but bear with me. There we go. So to start off, these are 5 organizations that pool together to start a support cluster against sexual violence. And we have a bit different target audiences, and we have a few different way of giving support. Most of us have, all of us have a chat, and most of us have also a physical clinic. Collectively, we have roughly 20,000 chats annually. Maybe I'll get back to that number a bit later. We have a coordinating partner called ChildX, and 2 funding partners, Sandberg Foundation and Childhood. So those make our work possible. And for this project, the Fronta, we have funding from Stella Polaris and Vinnova, the Swedish innovation agency. And I will show you a couple of print screens from the work in progress tool that we're using, Fronta, which have been developed together with 1050, a great company that has really been accommodating to our needs, and also with their experience amplified the outcome that we've been looking for. So first of all, we're looking at a search screen where I've written the word school, and then you can see chats where the word school has popped up, and it's a few thousand, I think. These are the chats that pop up, and you see the green and the purple field are the support seeker and the volunteer chatting with the support seeker. This way we can access a lot of data at the same time and analyze the actual chat logs, and we can also toggle with the different parameters on the left field here. So this is a really concrete way for us to see on a pooled level what kind of chats we're having. Especially interesting, I think, for the appliance for this, the application for this search field is that we don't tag every possible tag for every chat. So it could be that there's a catalogization that we haven't really found out yet. So, but it could also still be searchable. So, for instance, if we take like some new form of sexual violence that we haven't seen, we don't have a tag for it, but we can search for it and find it anyways, and that was really difficult before. So this is a great application to do that. And you can also see over each chat, you see rightward-facing arrow, and that's like a sentiment indicator if the chat is going in a positive direction or a negative direction. And you know, in our case, it's not always we want them to go in a positive direction, because sometimes the volunteer meets the support seeker. Especially in our case, we also work with offenders, so it's not always that they go in a positive direction. And then we have the more structured analysis. The same topic, or the same search word. We can see some data accompanied to that search topic. The most interesting and really easy to use way is the topic part, where we can see how this search word were cataloged by the volunteer. So, for instance, if the search word were school, and then you can see that sexual violence had the highest number of chats. So that could be an indicator of the arena that sexual violence is perpetrated on. But we need to be, we're careful drawing those kinds of conclusions, but it's possible to start to see. So here's a really interesting and trend analysis, which has great potential, I think, but it also shows the difficulty in how to, what kind of obstacles we meet when we start to try to implement it in real world. So the thinking is that if we see a new word popping up that we haven't seen before, it could be an indicator of something moving in our support seekers. So an example of that could be online transactions. In Sweden we have Swish. So at one point in time there were no chats that addressed Swish, but suddenly they started popping up, and then they would rise on this trend field. So you have like a metric of the prevalence of the word and the period before, and that gives a point, and the higher the point, the higher up the word comes.
One thing that I found really interesting with this Fronta project was that before you developed this prototype AI tool, all of the volunteers who were facilitating the chats were categorizing each chat, and you weren't really happy with the way that these categorizations were being made. You could see some people judging different chats differently, and you could also see a large gap where you couldn't really get this overview of what the support seekers were talking about. So this is really a good example of the way AI can help us gain more insights into data and also make our organizations more efficient.
Absolutely, and the effectiveness is what we aim to get out of it. And looking forward, we could really get the support from the AI to make the volunteers work more fluent and get less administrative work into their assignments. So and that's really a great presentation of what it could be in the future. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And I have a question for you as well, because you have obviously gone on this kind of journey of working more data focused. Was there anything that took you by surprise when starting to view these data as more of a resource?
Well, to start with, we've always had the data as a resource, and we've all of us put a lot of man-hour into analyzing it from our perspective. But it's like, as an organization, it's like looking at a looking glass instead of getting the bird's eye view, and this enables us to get the bird's eye view of what our pool of data is telling us. So that's I think the main positive that we can get a better overview of what we're looking at.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really interesting. Sometimes the data that we're working with is really obvious. It comes directly from children and youths, and we can use it to gain insights on that demographic. Sometimes it's not as obvious that the data holds a relevance to these kind of questions. Ben, you are working currently on another report, also funded by Stella Polaris, which is a feasibility study of the viability of studying financial transactions as a resource to gain insights on live-streamed child sexual abuse. And yeah, please take the stage, because I mean, the banking sector is really, we are talking about institutions where we aren't questioning the usage of personal data. We are, to a large extent, accepting the conditions that the banking industry can use our personal data to hold our financial means safe, but also to flag suspicious transactions. So the question is, can we use this data as a method of finding more perpetrators or finding previously unidentified perpetrators?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thanks, Erika. So yeah, the lab that I work for, the RIDES lab at the University of Nottingham, we're a big interdisciplinary research lab that focuses on all different types and manifestations of human trafficking and exploitation. And we got into this space of looking into the online sexual exploitation of children a couple of years ago, working with the International Justice Mission in the Philippines. And they approached us and asked us whether or not we thought it would be possible to estimate the extent of abuse and the extent of newly produced online child sexual exploitation material in the Philippines at that time. We managed it. And we concluded through that and kind of indicated that potentially up to 500,000 children during 2022 could have been trafficked to produce new CSEM in the Philippines. And as Erika has indicated, live streaming in particular is considered to be a key manifestation of that right now, and has been the subject of much of the recent attention around OSEC in the Philippines, particularly since the pandemic. And again, as Erika has indicated, we're now kind of moving on from that work, and we're happy to be working with Erika and Suzanne and the Stella Polaris team here at Childhood to kind of work backwards and try and follow the money, looking in particular at work that's going on in the Philippines to address the supply side of this issue and see whether we can use some of that work around financial transactions, investigations and prosecutions to work backwards and try and find out more about the people who are driving the demand for this type of content.
And just quickly entering here, because the one interesting aspect and one of the key problems areas of this is that financial transactions is a key part of live-streamed abuse. There are usually a perpetrator in a different country paying to direct a live-streamed abuse in this case, the Philippines.
Yeah.
So that's why this is a key focus area.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a financially motivated crime on the behalf of the supply side. And I think as part of that work and to try and kind of bring it back to being about data demystified and being reflections about data, I think despite the amount of attention that's been galvanized around this issue of live streaming in the Philippines, the responses to it are still quite limited, and for a number of reasons, and I think data is a big part of that. I think there's still quite an absence of strong empirical data regarding both demand and supply side offending behaviors. And we also see that there's still relatively few investigations and prosecutions on both sides of the equation. relative to the perceived size on it, thinking about like kind of 500,000 number that we mentioned right at the start. And there's potentially a couple of reasons for this. And I think at the center of it, to some extent, is that these live streamed exploitation streams don't leave the same online footprint as child sexual exploitation imagery does. You know, they don't appear in public spaces. The streams and the chats that lead up to the streams very much take place on encrypted social platforms and video messaging platforms, the same platforms you and I use to socialize and work professionally. And because of that, they're just not captured in the same way that some of the hash software that folks from the IWF mentioned this morning would capture static images and detect and remove them. So the empirical gap around live streaming is even greater than it is around some of the other issues that we've talked about. And I think linked to that also means that there's an inherent bias in what we think we know about live streaming. And there's a good chance, actually, that the narrow view we have around, you know, this Western overseas offender, the payment methods that they're using, the platforms that are being used, the modes of exploitation in the Philippines. We have a very kind of focus on familial exploitation, so people that the children already knew, kind of involved in the trafficking. There's a good chance that this is probably not representative, right, of the entire offending picture in the Philippines, and it's likely that we're missing out on some nuance and the kind of broader spectrum of offences that are occurring. And that is a big data problem. But we think through the work that we're doing, and to bring it back to finances, that there's a potentially big opportunity here for financial data to help us try and fill in these gaps. And we're kind of positing through the work that we're doing that, yeah, financial transaction data between foreign perpetrators and local facilitators could potentially be really crucial in upscaling the response to this. For example, investigations and prosecutions are currently very reliant on victim testimony, which can be problematic for a lot of reasons. And in fact, are often a major issue with trafficking and exploitation prosecutions across the board. It's certainly something that we see in the UK in relation to the low numbers of modern slavery prosecutions, and that concerns those around children, but also adult labour exploitation and adult sex trafficking as well. So I think, yeah, maybe something to explore through the questions, but I think we definitely think there's significant opportunities here for the financial sector, and particularly improved public-private collaboration between organisations like law enforcement and the financial sector, and potentially even triangulation with the kind of electronic service providers and the tech center do potentially hold a key to doing more good and scaling up the response to this problem.
Thank you, Ben. Really interesting, because when we're looking at, I'm connecting back to the bias of data that you talked about, when we're looking at the kind of the image of the Western perpetrator that you talked about, the understanding that we had, one thing that kind of stood out to us was the age, the common age, which was fairly high. And that poses the question, if our data, which is informing this, is biased, would that mean that these are actually only the ones that are getting caught? But the actual perpetrators who are being successful in continuing to exploit children are the ones who are avoiding the law enforcement and avoiding getting caught.
And that's called survival bias.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We're going to shift the focus a little bit more back to where we started with the common understanding of the main relevant data source, which is child sexual abuse material, or at least that's what many people think is the main relevant data. Before, in our previous session, Mathijs, you mentioned that you were using AI to actually gain insights from data which you would not be able to legally possess and use. Mm-hmm. In Sweden, it is not, or it's illegal to possess and use and view child sexual abuse material. But if you have sufficient cause, for example, if you are a researcher or a company developing tools for this, you might actually be able to use this material or this data to develop insights, for example. You are going to talk a bit more about the Libra technology that you developed after the AI Roundtable in 2019, and more importantly, how you are able to handle this data as a non-law enforcement agency. So, yeah,
Yes.
stage is yours.
Thank you. Before I dive into the topic, I thought it might be interesting to tell a little story about how WebIQ was actually born as a company. 15 years ago, I was operating a commercial search engine. We built a search engine and we had the dream, ambition, naive idea of beating Google. We thought 15 years ago, maybe you could have done it. We tried it at least. To build a search engine for images that could compete with how Google did it back then. I think in terms of technology, we did a great job. It was super difficult to market it and to get some customers and people visiting us. But the technology, what we did is, just as Google does, we crawl the internet looking for images, looking at them, indexing them, and making them available via a search engine. We collected billions and billions of images, and at the end we even had about 300,000 visitors a month on our website, which was great.
Cool.
If you put ads on your website, that means that you are about to earn, let's say, 200 euros a month. So difficult business model. Anyway, after a few years, we always had these filters in our search engine where we made sure that no pornography, adult pornography, would get through there. And once in a while, we did some routine checks on that filter. And on one evening, I got this call from my colleague, and he was quite worried because he had seen quite a lot of child abuse material. That's what we call it now. Then it was just horrific content, and we called it all kinds of names. So we took a look, and after quite a bad night's sleep, we decided that it would be good to contact the police. First of all, because somehow we didn't want to have this material and needed some help. We thought maybe the other way around. Maybe the police could use our help because we're seeing this stuff online, and maybe together we can do something about it. Quickly, we did some projects with the Dutch National Police, and after 1 or 2 years, we decided to abandon the other company and found WebIQ. And ever since then, we are working for law enforcement to collect data online. We are now collecting data from the darknet, as you've seen this morning, and helping law enforcement or other organizations to get a grip on what's happening online there. One thing that was still difficult is that we as a company, in the Netherlands at least, are not allowed to have this material. So we can work with law enforcement. We have all kinds of creative solutions where we deploy our tools on their premise so they can collect this kind of information. But we were still very curious on the first question why we started the company is where is this information online? We just stumbled upon it with our web crawler back then. Is it still online on the public web? And can we get some idea on where it is distributed and what the trends and distribution patterns are? So how can we do that? How can we scan the internet, the public internet, get an idea on how this material is distributed without having the material actually as a company? So that question, we took that question to childhood, turned it into a project, and in the end, we developed what we call Libra. And this was not done on our own. We had great help from the Dutch legal authorities to discuss with us what is possible and what isn't possible. When are we allowed to, maybe do something with the material and when not? So we developed this very simple idea. Instead of us downloading the material, could we just scan it somewhere else and then only have the metadata? A very vague idea it was back then. But that's what we did. So this is our platform. Instead of collecting all these images from all these kind of websites and looking at them, putting them in a database and seeing some patterns on child abuse, we thought we'd do it differently. So we developed some technology that allowed us to quickly take the image, not on our platform, but somewhere else, just for a few milliseconds, compute a hash, and then forget about the whole image and only send back the metadata to us. If somehow this fits within the frame of legal possibilities. At least we are not building a huge database of child abuse material on our platform. This is good. But we still have some idea on what the material is. So we can do a scan of all the images that we see, for example, hosted in Sweden on the public internet, compute a hash of the images, and then when we have only the hash, we can compare it with the hashes of known child abuse material. So very simple idea with a lot of technical work behind it. But at least, there we go. We were now able to perform these scans, that we call them. We have scanned in the meanwhile billions and billions of images. We always do this with a certain kind of focus, so it's not just random on the whole internet. We try to create an image of the distribution of this material, for example, for a specific country or a specific social media environment. Billions of images we have scanned, and we were able to pinpoint to certain hotspots in Europe where we see that a lot of child abuse images are being hosted. And we also see that after law enforcement has done some interceptions, that child abuse material is gone there, but unfortunately moved somewhere else. But at least we have some grip and some view on what's happening out there. So in the end, after 15 years, it's good to have part of this this problem solved now. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you. Really interesting. And I mean, what is the main information that you can share? What is the main kind of insights that you are providing the law enforcement with through Libra? Is it the servers which are hosting?
Yeah, so we make summaries of the scans. We provide that to law enforcement, for example, Europol, so they can act upon it. So that's one thing. For me, as a lesson learned from the whole project, it's mainly that up till then I was always used to, when we had to talk to lawyers and legal people, it was always about, no, it's not possible. While in this project, I learned that it's actually, when you collaborate quite well, you can talk about the possibilities instead of talking about what's not possible. So that was really helpful and really positive, I think, for me in the whole project.
That's really interesting. And this specifically, this mindset of viewing what's actually possible, asking the questions, what could we do with this data, what is legally possible, and not just accepting these kind of perceived barriers to using data. I think these are examples that all of you have some insights from. So do you have some thoughts about that, Rickard? About perceived barriers to, for example, data using or data sharing? Yeah,
I don't know, so from representing an academia and maybe not working with this extremely type of sensitive data or like this type of data. But then again, and I think then like looking into all possibilities of like cross-sharing, and then it's just simple because the possibility of gaining like more information. And then with respect to the actual barriers that you're talking about, so then for me or for my center personally, then it's more like that, okay, it's like ethical, how to use the data. So then we have to fill in like certain forms. So then we like ask for certain type of data. And then of course that is important. But that also then, I mean, of course, it comes with restrictions, and then also obviously if we are allowed at all to like share the data. So it's quite common that we can, I mean, it can be like different research groups working on the same thing, but we are not allowed to share the data. And that's like, that's a problem. No, I didn't talk anything about how to overcome. I only talked about non-possibilities.
Well, actually, I think it's interesting because the research funder Forte, they actually recently opened up an open call for researchers to reuse data which has already been collected for a specific research purpose and apply a different research question to that data.
Yeah.
But of course, it's easier for an organization to use data and to kind of share data as well.
Absolutely, and I didn't mention, but the Fronta tool is also open source, so it's free for everyone to use when it's done. And what we're aiming at is, I mentioned 20,000 chats, and it's maybe 20 or 40 data points linked to that specific chat. That it's not a big data pool if we look at the total number of chats that are being done by the big players in Sweden. So what we really aim to do is to get an API working so that everyone can share data in that, and on an aggregated level we can see what's going on with youth in general in Sweden, and I think that's a real possibility and not at all like impossible.
So as just a final question, because people are seeping in from the parallel session and we are absolutely a bit over time here, what is one aspect that you would say would increase the usage of data which is already being collected today? One aspect of knowledge or action?
I think thinking from the financial perspective, I think it's very much a question of will, resources, and prioritization. You know, I think the financial companies are under a lot of pressure to deal with things like money laundering, fraud, terrorism, and I think whatever we can do in terms of research and drawing attention to the problem and evidencing the problem, I think will help to bump child protection further up their agenda. So I think that's kind of what we can do in this space to push them, in addition to enabling them through things like AI and software tools that can help make them handle the volume and complexity of data more straightforward, which seems kind of fairly inevitable with the way things are moving.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me in this discussion. I wish we could continue this panel for at least another hour because it's needed, but time is absolutely running out. So thank you and give a huge applause.